The mysterious encounter. The thick jungle was alive with strange sounds. Leaves rustled even when there was no wind, and distant roars echoed through the towering trees. Ethan Carter moved carefully, stepping over twisted roots and avoiding sharp, glowing plants. His ship had crash-landed just hours ago, and now he was stranded on this unknown world, a death world. His breathing was heavy, his heart racing. His survival instincts told him one thing: stay alert. This planet was dangerous. The air was dense, thick with the scent of wet earth and something metallic. He gripped his small survival knife tightly. A weapon wouldn't help much against the kind of creatures that lived in places like this, but it was better than nothing. Ethan had seen the crash data before he blacked out. This planet had a high predator population, extreme weather, and unstable terrain. In short, it was a nightmare. As he pushed forward, something moved in the shadows. A flash of violet light. He spun around, knife raised. Nothing. His fingers tightened around the handle. Was he being watched? A rustling noise came from behind him. He turned fast, but this time, he was too late. A figure dropped down from the trees, landing just a few feet away. Ethan took a step back, his knife raised defensively. It was a girl. No, not human. She had deep violet eyes that shimmered in the dim light, and her dark skin had a faint silver sheen. Her long black hair was braided tightly, and she wore strange armor made from some kind of insect-like exoskeleton. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, to Ethan's shock, she grinned. "You survived a death world too?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Incredible. Ethan stared, his brain struggling to process what was happening. She spoke English. How? Whoa, he started, but before he could finish, a deafening roar shook the jungle. The ground trembled as something massive crashed through the trees. Ethan barely had time to react before a huge beast-like creature emerged from the shadows. It stood on 6 muscular legs, its scaled body covered in sharp spines. Its eyes glowed red, locking onto them like a predator spotting its next meal. Ethan's stomach dropped. This thing was a hunter. Before he could decide whether to fight or run, the alien girl grabbed his wrist and pulled him to the side. "Run," she yelled. Ethan didn't argue. He sprinted after her, dodging low-hanging vines and jumping over rocks. Behind them, the creature let out another bone-rattling roar and charge. Branches snapped. The ground shook with every step of the beast. Ethan risked a glance back. The creature was gaining on them. The alien girl suddenly grabbed a rope-like vine hanging from a tree and swung up. Ethan hesitated. He had no idea how to climb like that. "Climb, human," she called from above. Ethan cursed under his breath, but grabbed the vine. He wasn't as graceful as she was, but his survival instinct kicked in. He pulled himself up just as the creature lunged forward. The beast slammed into the tree, sending vibrations through the branches. Ethan held on tight as the alien girl reached down and grabbed his arm, helping him onto a thick branch. The monster below let out a furious screech, snapping its jaws, but it couldn't reach them. For now, they were safe. Ethan took deep breaths, trying to steady himself. He turned to the girl, who was sitting casually on the branch like she had done this 100 times. "Who are you?" he asked. She tilted her head, studying him. "I am Lyra. And you?" "Ethan Carter." Lyra's glowing violet eyes flickered with amusement. "Strange name." "Right back at you," Ethan muttered. She smirked. "You are not the first human I have seen." Ethan blinked in surprise. "Wait, you've met other humans?" Lyra shrugged. "A long time ago." Ethan frowned. That didn't make sense. This planet was uncharted. No humans had ever recorded being here before. Before he could ask more, Lyra stood up. "We cannot stay here. The beast will return." Ethan sighed. He had just survived a crash, escaped a monster, and now he was sitting in a tree with an alien girl who spoke English, and somehow he had a feeling this was just the beginning. "Fine," he said, pushing himself up. "Lead the way." Lyra grinned. "Try to keep up, human." She leaped to the next branch effortlessly. Ethan groaned and followed. Whatever this planet was, it was about to get a lot more dangerous. A deadly alliance. The night was alive with unfamiliar sounds. Strange chittering noises echoed in the distance, blending with the occasional deep, guttural growl of unseen predators. The jungle never truly slept on this planet. It was a living, breathing entity, and every shadow seemed to be watching. Ethan sat by the dim glow of a makeshift fire, still trying to process everything. His ship was gone, his comms were useless, and his only ally was a violet-eyed alien girl who moved through the jungle like she was born for it. Across from him, Lyra sharpened a blade made from some kind of chitin, its curved edge reflecting the flickering firelight. Despite her youthful appearance, there was something about the way she carried herself. Calm, calculated, always aware of her surroundings. "You haven't stopped staring since we sat down," she said without looking up. Ethan blinked, shaking himself out of his daze. "Yeah, well, I don't meet aliens every day, especially ones that speak English." Lyra let out a short, amused breath. "Your kind believes they are the only ones who survive Deathworlds." She glanced up at him, her glowing eyes unreadable. "You are wrong." Ethan leaned forward. "So, what? You're saying your people crash-landed here too?" Her expression darkened. She dragged the sharpening stone along the blade one last time before setting it aside. "My people did not crash. They lived here, thrived here, until they were wiped out." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "Wiped out," he echoed. Lyra nodded, gaze distant. "This world is not kind to weakness. My people were warriors, but even warriors can fall when the real enemy is not the jungle, but something worse." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean, worse?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into a small leather pouch at her waist and pulled out a smooth black stone. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. "This," she said, holding it up for Ethan to see. "This is why they died." Ethan instinctively leaned away. "What is it?" "A relic. A weapon. A curse." Lyra's grip tightened around it. "It does not belong in this world, yet it has claimed it as its own." Ethan narrowed his eyes. He had heard cryptic talk like this before from frontier colonists. Stories about ancient ruins, lost technology, and forces beyond human understanding. But this felt different. Before he could press for more answers, a sudden rustling in the bushes snapped both of them to full alert. Lyra moved first, extinguishing the fire with a quick motion. Ethan grabbed his knife and pressed himself against the nearest tree, scanning the darkness. The sound grew closer. Something big was moving through the foliage. Ethan swallowed hard. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is." Lyra slowly drew her blade. "If you think it is death, then yes." A low, throaty snarl rumbled through the jungle. Then the creature emerged. It was twice the size of the beast they had escaped earlier, its scaled body glistening in the faint moonlight. Thick, powerful limbs ended in razor-sharp claws, and its elongated skull bore rows of needle-like teeth. But it wasn't the size or the teeth that made Ethan's blood run cold. It was the eyes. They glowed the same unnatural violet as Lyra's. Ethan didn't get time to question it. The creature charged. "Move," Lyra shouted. Ethan barely managed to roll aside before the beast's massive claws tore into the tree where he had been standing. Splinters exploded into the air as the creature let out a deafening screech. Lyra was already moving. She darted forward with inhuman speed, sliding under the creature's belly and slicing at its exposed underbelly. A deep, dark fluid spilled onto the ground. But the beast barely seemed fazed. Ethan scrambled to his feet, heart hammering. He had no weapons capable of taking something like this down. But Lyra did. "Any bright ideas?" he shouted, ducking behind another tree. Lyra's response was immediate. "Don't die." "Great advice." The beast turned, its glowing eyes locking onto Ethan. In a blur of motion, it lunged. Ethan had no time to think, only to react. He threw himself to the side just as the creature's claws slammed into the ground, missing him by inches. He hit the dirt hard, pain jolting through his ribs, but he forced himself to move. Lyra was already behind the beast, climbing its back like a predator of her own. She plunged her blade deep into its neck, twisting it violently. The creature shrieked, thrashing wildly. For a moment, Ethan thought they had won. Then, something terrifying happened. The creature began to change. Its muscles bulged unnaturally, its wounds sealing before his eyes. The dark blood that had spilled onto the ground moved, slithering back toward the beast like it had a mind of its own. "What the hell?" Ethan started. Lyra leaped off the creature, landing beside him. "It's adapting." Ethan shot her a look. "That's not normal." Lyra wiped her blade clean, ice cold. "On this world, it is." The creature turned toward them, its body still shifting. Its eyes burned even brighter, locking onto Ethan with an intensity that made his stomach drop. Lyra reached into her pouch and pulled out the black stone. The moment it touched her palm, the creature froze. Ethan didn't breathe. The jungle went silent. Then, in a voice that was not its own, the creature spoke. "You should not be here." Ethan's blood turned to ice. The voice was wrong. Layered, ancient, something that did not belong to flesh and bone. Beside him, Lyra's expression was grim. "We need to leave." Ethan wasn't about to argue. Without another word, they turned and ran. The jungle swallowed them whole, but Ethan knew one thing for certain. This planet was hiding something much worse than just monsters. The ruins of the past. The jungle was endless. A maze of towering, twisted trees with roots as thick as serpents, their canopies so dense that only fragmented moonlight broke through. Ethan Carter had never seen anything like it. The deeper they went, the quieter the jungle became, as if even the creatures that ruled this death world refused to venture here. Ethan's boots crunched against the damp ground as he followed Lyra, his strange, violet-eyed alien companion. She moved with the ease of someone who had spent her entire life in this hostile terrain. He, on the other hand, was struggling to keep up, his breath heavy from exhaustion. "Where exactly are we going?" Ethan finally asked. Lyra didn't stop, didn't even glance back. "Somewhere safe." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Safe? After what just happened, I'm not sure anywhere on this planet counts as safe." Lyra didn't argue. Instead, she slowed, then motioned for him to follow her down a narrow path obscured by thick, vine-covered stone walls. Ethan squinted as he stepped through, feeling the air grow noticeably cooler. The sounds of the jungle faded into eerie silence. Then he saw it. The ruins. Hidden beneath centuries of overgrowth, the remains of a massive alien city sprawled before him. Towering structures, once mighty, were now crumbling under the weight of nature's reclamation. The streets were cracked and broken, lined with toppled statues of humanoid figures with hollow, empty eyes. Ethan exhaled sharply. "You live here." Lyra stepped forward, brushing her fingers over a wall covered in strange, glowing symbols. "I survive here." Ethan hesitated before stepping beside her. His fingers traced the carvings. They looked old, older than anything he had ever seen. "What is this place?" he asked. Lyra's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "The last city of my people." Ethan turned to her, stunned. "You mean this was?" "My home," she finished. For the first time since they met, Lyra looked vulnerable. Her usual confident, battle-hardened demeanor was gone, replaced by something far heavier: grief. Ethan looked around at the ruins again, now seeing them in a different light. This wasn't just an abandoned city. This was a graveyard. "What happened to them?" he asked carefully. Lyra was silent for a moment. Then she gestured for him to follow. They'd walked through the ancient streets, past massive, broken pillars and shattered doorways. The further they went, the more signs of battle became evident. Burn marks scorched the walls, deep claw marks tore through solid stone, and strange pools of darkened, fossilized liquid stained the ground. "They fought," Lyra finally said, her voice tight. "They fought harder than any species ever has." She clenched her fists. But they lost. Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. To what? Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she led him into the shadowed remains of what once might have been a grand temple or palace. The inside was lined with intricate murals, stories carved in stone. Ethan's breath caught as he took them in. The first panel showed Lyra's people, tall, proud warriors standing in formations, their weapons raised high. The second panel showed something else. Dark, monstrous figures emerging from the ground itself. Their bodies were twisted, wrong, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed like burning embers. The third panel was a massacre. Lyra's people fought, but they were outnumbered, overpowered. The monsters consumed them. The final panel was the worst. It showed one last warrior standing, alone, holding a small, pulsing black stone. The same stone Lyra had shown Ethan before. Ethan took a step back. His skin was cold. This is what you were talking about, isn't it?" Lyra nodded. "The creatures you saw in the jungle, the one that spoke in that unnatural voice. They were once my people." Ethan felt his pulse hammering in his skull. "You're telling me those things out there are my ancestors," Lyra finished. Ethan clenched his jaw, trying to wrap his mind around what he was hearing. But how? How did they become that? Lyra closed her eyes for a moment before she spoke. "It started with the stone, the relic." Ethan instinctively glanced at her pouch, where she still kept the ominous black stone. "You said it was a weapon." Lyra nodded. "It was supposed to make us stronger, to help us survive this world." She looked up at him, and for the first time, there was real fear in her expression. Instead, it changed us. A deep silence settled between them. Ethan looked around at the ruins again, his mind racing. This wasn't just a lost civilization. This was a warning. "If you knew the relic was dangerous," he said carefully, "why are you still carrying it?" Lyra's grip on the stone tightened. "Because it's not done yet." Ethan stiffened. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, a distant sound shattered the silence. A low, bone-chilling howl. Ethan's blood ran cold. He recognized that sound. The mutated creatures. They were coming. Lyra's head snapped toward the temple's entrance. "They must have followed us." Ethan reached for his knife, but he knew it was useless against whatever was out there. "Tell me there's a way out of here." Lyra's eyes flickered to one of the murals. The last warrior holding the relic. "There is," she said, turning toward the back of the temple. "But you're not going to like it." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Why does it always have to be like that?" Lyra gave him a smirk, despite the tension. "Wouldn't be a Deathworld if it was easy." Another howl, closer this time. No more time to talk. Ethan followed Lyra deeper into the ruins, knowing that whatever waited for them next would either bring answers or their deaths. The Deathworld's true horror. The ruins trembled with the sound of distant howls. It wasn't just one creature. It was many. The jungle outside the ancient city had come alive with movement, stalking shadows, glowing eyes peering through the darkness. Ethan Carter wiped the sweat from his brow, his fingers gripping his knife so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had no real weapon against whatever was coming. Beside him, Lyra remained unnervingly calm. Her violet eyes flickered as she moved with purpose through the dark temple corridors. The walls here were covered in the same ancient carvings, but these ones were different. They weren't just history. They were warnings. The air felt heavier, thicker. Ethan's breathing grew shallow. "Are we seriously running deeper into the ruins?" he whispered. Lyra didn't stop. "There's nowhere else to go." Ethan let out a harsh breath. "Yeah. And what happens when we run out of places to run?" Lyra's eyes met his. "Then we fight." Ethan didn't like that answer. Behind them, the howls grew closer. The creatures had entered the ruins. Their claws scraped against stone, their heavy breaths echoing in the halls. They weren't just hunting. They were toying with them. Ethan gritted his teeth. Any bright ideas? Lyra suddenly turned down a side passage, vanishing into the shadows. Ethan cursed under his breath but followed. The passage was narrow, just wide enough for them to slip through single file. The walls here were covered in strange pulsing veins of dark crystal, giving off an eerie glow. Lyra, what the hell is this place? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pressed her hand against a section of the wall. A soft hum filled the air, and suddenly, the wall moved. Ethan stumbled back as a hidden doorway slid open, revealing a massive underground chamber. The space was unlike anything Ethan had seen before. Massive pillars lined the cavern, each one engraved with spiraling alien symbols. Strange floating orbs of light hovered above, casting an eerie glow. And at the center of the chamber, a throne. It was ancient, carved from dark stone, and pulsing with a deep red light. Surrounding it were dozens of fossilized remains, skeletons that were not quite human, but not quite monstrous either. Ethan took a step forward, his stomach twisting. Lyra, what is this? She hesitated before answering. The place where the last of my people chose their fate. Ethan turned to her. What fate? Lyra's fingers hovered over the black relic stone at her waist. The relic doesn't just change people. Her voice was quiet now, almost reverent. It chooses them. Ethan frowned. What the hell does that mean? Before she could answer, a guttural growl sounded from the passage behind them. Ethan spun around. The creatures had arrived. They stepped forward into the chamber, their monstrous forms silhouetted by the dim red light. Their bodies were warped, grotesque, once humanoid, but now barely recognizable. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He wasn't looking at mindless beasts. He was looking at what was left of Lyra's people. One of them stepped forward, its blackened skin twisted unnaturally, bones shifting beneath its flesh as it moved. But the worst part, the part that made Ethan's skin crawl, was its eyes. They were the same violet as Lyra's. The creature stopped, tilting its head. Then, in a voice that wasn't its own, it spoke. The cycle must continue. Ethan stumbled back. What the? Lyra stepped forward. Her expression was unreadable. Not this time, she whispered. The creatures growled in unison. The air in the chamber grew heavy, pressing against Ethan's chest like a crushing weight. The throne at the center of the room pulsed violently, and the carvings on the pillars began to glow. Ethan's heart pounded. Lyra, what the hell is happening? She turned to him, and for the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. The relic is waking up. Ethan barely had time to process those words before the creatures attacked. They moved with inhuman speed, lunging toward them in a blur of claws and fangs. Ethan barely had time to dodge, rolling to the side as one of them slammed into the ground where he had just been standing. Lyra was already moving. She drew her blade in one fluid motion, slicing through the nearest creature's leg. The monster let out an ear-piercing screech, staggering back, but it didn't bleed. Instead, its wounds sealed instantly. Ethan's stomach dropped. Oh, come on. Lyra didn't waste time responding. She grabbed Ethan's arm, yanking him toward the throne. The only way to stop them is to break the cycle, she shouted. Ethan glanced at the pulsing relic embedded in the throne. He didn't like where this was going. You're not about to tell me I have to sit on that thing, are you? Lyra's jaw tightened. You might not have a choice. Ethan turned just in time to see one of the creatures leap toward him, its twisted jaws snapping inches from his face. He barely managed to bring his knife up, stabbing it in the side. The monster let out a sickening hiss but didn't slow. Then, Lyra raised the relic stone. The creatures froze. Their bodies trembled, their violet eyes flickering with something Ethan couldn't quite read. Pain. Recognition. The chamber shook violently. The symbols on the pillars flared to life, and a deep, ancient voice filled the air. The heir must choose. Ethan's breath caught. What the hell does that mean? Lyra swallowed hard. It means only one of us is leaving here alive. The chamber shook harder. The creatures roared. The relic pulsed. And Ethan realized. This wasn't a battle. This was a test. A test he wasn't sure he was ready to take. Betrayal in the dark. The air in the underground chamber was thick with tension. The glowing symbols on the walls pulsed, their crimson light casting eerie shadows that danced across the ancient stone. Ethan Carter could barely hear his own breathing over the deep, resonant hum filling the space. The relic pulsed, embedded in the throne at the center of the chamber, a steady, hypnotic rhythm, like a heartbeat that did not belong to anything living. And standing before it was Lyra. Her violet eyes were locked onto the twisted creatures that surrounded them, the last remnants of her people. Their mutated forms writhed, caught between instincts of violence and something else. Something familiar. Ethan gripped his knife, sweat dripping down his brow. What the hell was he supposed to do? The voice, that ancient, inhuman voice, whispered again, vibrating through the very stone of the ruins. The heir must choose. Lyra exhaled, her grip on the small black relic stone tightening. We don't have much time, she murmured. Ethan swallowed hard. You keep saying that, but I still have no idea what the hell is happening. Lyra's eyes flickered toward him, something unreadable in her expression. This chamber is not just a ruin, Ethan. It is a trial. A test designed by the ancients to determine who is worthy. Ethan let out a humorless laugh. Worthy? Of what? Because if it's dying in a hole, I think I already passed. Lyra shook her head. Not dying. She turned toward the throne, her voice quiet but heavy. Becoming. The air thickened. Ethan's stomach dropped. Wait. No. No. No, no. Whatever you're thinking, stop thinking it right now. Lyra ignored him. Her gaze was fixed on the throne, on the relic embedded within it. The creatures around them began to stir, their violet eyes glowing brighter. Their voices, if they could even be called voices, spoke in overlapping whispers. The cycle, the cycle, the cycle. Ethan took a step back. Lyra, I really don't like this. Lyra didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost regretful. I think I was wrong about you, Ethan. A cold chill ran down Ethan's spine. What? Lyra turned to face him fully. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a strange finality in her gaze. You are strong, she admitted, but you are not the one this place has been waiting for. Before Ethan could react, Lyra moved. Fast, too fast. One moment she was standing before him. The next, she was behind him. The knife was at his throat. Ethan froze. His breath hitched as the blade pressed just enough to sting. He hadn't even seen her move. Lyra. His voice was quiet, steady. What are you doing? The creatures around them did not attack. They watched, waiting. Lyra leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. You don't understand, Ethan, she murmured. This isn't just my home. This is my destiny. The relic pulsed. Stronger. Louder. Ethan clenched his jaw. He could feel her grip. Firm, but hesitant. She wasn't sure. She was conflicted. He had one chance. Lyra, he said carefully, I don't know what this place is telling you, but you don't have to do this. Lyra's jaw tightened. You don't understand. My people were chosen. This relic, it was meant for us. But we failed. We were too weak. Her violet eyes darkened. I won't fail. Ethan exhaled sharply. And what? You think if you kill me, this place is just going to make you some kind of god? Lyra hesitated. The knife wavered, just slightly. The throne, she whispered. It wants a successor. Ethan swallowed. And you think that's you?" Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she moved again, shoving Ethan forward, toward the throne. He stumbled, barely catching himself. He turned sharply, bringing his knife up, but Lyra was already backing away, her gaze locked onto the glowing relic. Her breathing was heavy, her fingers twitching. She was fighting something. Ethan realized it then. She was hearing it too. The voice, the whispers. They weren't just in the chamber. They were in her mind, and they were trying to claim her. Ethan stepped forward, his knife lowered. "Lyra, listen to me. This thing, whatever it is, it's not offering you power. It's trying to turn you into one of them." Lyra flinched. The creatures surrounding them hissed at his words, shifting restlessly. Ethan pressed on. "You said your people lost, right? What if this?" He gestured around them, to the ruins, to the throne, to the relic itself. "It's how. What if this thing is what made them into the monsters outside?" Lyra's breath hitched. Her fingers clenched. For a brief moment, Ethan saw it. Doubt. But before he could say more, the chamber shook violently. The symbols on the walls flared to life, and the whispers became a roar. Lyra screamed, clutching her head. Her body convulsed, her veins glowing with the same dark energy as the relic. Ethan lunged forward. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. He grabbed her wrist, yanking her away from the throne. The second her skin left the relic's pull, the glow flickered, then vanished. Lyra collapsed against him, her breathing ragged. The creatures let out ear-piercing screeches, thrashing wildly as the chamber began to collapse. Ethan tightened his grip on Lyra, dragging her toward the exit. "Come on. We are not dying in this cursed tomb." She stumbled, her body still trembling from the relic's hold, but she ran with him. The ancient temple cracked apart, massive chunks of stone crashing down around them. Ethan dove through the collapsing passage, shielding Lyra as the entrance behind them sealed shut. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a sharp gasp. Lyra pushed herself up, her breathing shaky. Her violet eyes were dull now, the unnatural glow gone. Ethan sat up beside her, chest heaving. "Tell me you're done listening to creepy rock voices." Lyra let out a small, breathless laugh. "For now." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Good, because I think we just pissed off whatever lives in that thing." Lyra looked toward the now sealed ruins, her expression unreadable. "We aren't done here." Ethan groaned. "Of course we aren't." She turned to him, and for the first time, there was something new in her gaze. Not just determination, not just regret, but trust. "We'll stop it," she said. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah, guess we have to." Above them, the jungle was eerily silent. Something was waiting, watching, and Ethan had the sinking feeling that this war was just beginning. The final stand. The jungle outside the ruins was eerily silent. Not the kind of silence that brought peace, but the kind that warned of something lurking just beyond sight. Ethan Carter crouched behind a massive fallen tree, his breath shallow. Beside him, Lyra was just as tense. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, calculated fear. They weren't alone. Somewhere in the darkness, the creatures were hunting them. The relic inside the ruins was buried beneath tons of fallen stone, but that hadn't stopped the monsters outside from knowing something had changed. Something had woken up. Ethan adjusted his grip on his knife, though he knew it was practically useless against what they were facing. His human instincts screamed at him to run, to find a way off this nightmare of a planet. But there was nowhere to run. Lyra exhaled slowly. "They're waiting." Ethan glanced at her. For what? Lyra didn't take her eyes off the tree line. "For us to make the first move." Ethan felt a shiver crawl down his spine. The last time they faced these things, the creatures had been relentless, savage, mindless. Now they were strategic. And that meant one thing. They were learning. Lyra's fingers hovered over the small, pulsing relic stone at her waist, the fragment she had kept. Ethan had argued that they should leave it behind, but Lyra had insisted. The relic is connected to them, she had told him. If we destroy it, we might be able to stop them. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was also their only hope. A branch snapped. Ethan tensed. The creatures were moving, slowly, surrounding them. He felt a sharp prickle at the back of his neck, a deep, unnatural instinct that something was about to go very, very wrong. Then the whisper came. The cycle must continue. Ethan's breath hitched. It was the same voice from the ruins. The same voice that had nearly claimed Lyra's mind. But this time, it wasn't coming from the ruins. It was coming from the trees. Ethan's heart pounded. He turned his head slowly, and his stomach dropped. There, standing among the thick vines and ancient roots, was a figure. But it wasn't one of the mutated creatures. It was human. Or at least, it used to be. The figure stepped forward, its movements eerily smooth. Its skin was darkened and cracked, like something had fused to it. Glowing violet veins pulsed beneath its flesh, spreading like an infection. Its eyes, God, its eyes, were hollow voids of shifting light. Ethan's pulse pounded in his skull. "Lyra," he whispered, "what the hell am I looking at?" Lyra's expression hardened. A failed successor. The thing that had once been a man tilted its head, studying them. Then, in a voice layered with something ancient, it spoke. "You are too late." Ethan's blood turned to ice. Too late for what? The thing's lips pulled into something that was not a smile. Too late to stop what has already begun. Ethan felt the air shift. And then the jungle exploded. The creatures rushed forward, a wave of shifting, monstrous forms. Claws sliced through the trees, violet light flashed in the dark, and the entire world descended into chaos. Ethan moved on instinct. He grabbed Lyra's wrist and ran. The two of them dove through the dense undergrowth, dodging jagged roots and ducking beneath low-hanging vines. Behind them, the monsters shrieked and howled, tearing through everything in their path. "Tell me you have a plan," Ethan shouted. Lyra's eyes flashed. "Get to the obsidian spire." Ethan cursed. "The what?" "The heart of the Deathworld," she said, "where the relic was first awakened. If we destroy it there, we might be able to break its hold for good." Ethan didn't like how many times she had said, "might." But there wasn't time to argue. They burst into a clearing, and there it was, the spire. It was unlike anything Ethan had seen before, a jagged, towering monolith of pure black stone, pulsing with violet energy. It stretched into the sky, its surface shifting like liquid, as if it weren't entirely real. And at its base, waiting for them, was the corrupted human. Ethan skidded to a stop. Lyra raised her blade. The thing lifted a single hand. Instantly, the creatures behind them stopped. A terrifying stillness settled over the clearing. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I don't suppose you're going to let us just walk up there and smash the thing." The corrupted figure didn't blink. The cycle must continue. Lyra clenched her jaw. Not this time. She lunged. The fight was a blur of movement and violet energy. Lyra moved like a storm. Her blade flashed, slicing through the air. The corrupted human dodged effortlessly, countering with inhuman speed. Ethan knew he couldn't just stand there. He turned to the spire. The relic at its core glowed brighter, reacting to his presence. It was calling to him. The whispers filled his head. "You can be more." Ethan gritted his teeth. No, he wasn't playing their game. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the small explosive charge he always carried. It wasn't much, but if he placed it right, he dashed forward. The corrupted figure turned, too late. Ethan slammed the explosive onto the spire. The thing's eyes widened. No. Ethan dove back. The explosion ripped through the clearing. The spire cracked. The energy inside flared wildly, violet tendrils lashing out in all directions. The creatures screamed. The corrupted human fell to his knees, his form flickering. The jungle shook, the air itself shattered. And then, silence. The spire collapsed. The creatures vanished, their bodies disintegrating into dust. Ethan forced himself to sit up, his body aching. He turned. Lyra was kneeling, breathing hard, but alive. She looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. "You really just blew it up." Ethan shrugged, wincing. Seemed like the quickest option. She let out a breathless laugh. "You are insane." Ethan grinned. "Yeah, well, I'm still alive, so I must be doing something right." Lyra's gaze drifted toward the ruins of the spire. "It's over." Ethan wasn't so sure. Because deep in the jungle, beneath the ruins, in the dark places no one had yet seen, something else stirred. The relic was gone. But the Deathworld was not finished with them yet. Escape or extinction. Epic conclusion. The obsidian spire lay in ruins. The once towering monolith, pulsing with the unnatural violet energy of the relic, was now nothing but shattered stone and fading embers of power. The jungle around it had gone silent, a sharp contrast to the chaos that had consumed it moments before. Ethan Carter lay on the damp, scorched ground, staring up at the dark sky. Every inch of his body ached. His ears were still ringing from the explosion. He had done it. He had destroyed the relic. But the planet, the Deathworld, was still alive. A cough snapped him back to reality. He turned his head, spotting Lyra struggling to push herself up from the ground. Her violet eyes had lost their unnatural glow, but exhaustion was written all over her face. "You good?" Ethan croaked. Lyra managed a weak, breathless laugh. "Alive." Ethan exhaled, rolling onto his side. "Then we're tied." She pushed herself up onto her knees, surveying the remains of the spire. "It's gone." Ethan followed her gaze. "Yeah, and I think your creepy ancestors are too." The creatures, the twisted, mutated remnants of Lyra's people, were gone. Not dead. Not lying in heaps of broken bodies. Just gone. Like they had never existed at all. Lyra let out a slow breath, running a hand over her face. It worked. Ethan wanted to feel relieved, wanted to believe that this nightmare was finally over. But something still felt wrong. His gaze flickered to the sky. The planet's 2 moons hung eerily still, casting pale, ghostly light over the jungle. The wind didn't move. Even the ever-present whispers were gone. Too quiet. Too still. Ethan's fingers tightened instinctively around the hilt of his knife. "Lyra, does this planet feel off to you?" Lyra frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan gestured to the jungle. The air, the silence. "It's like a sound. Soft, almost imperceptible. A faint, rumbling vibration beneath the earth." Then, the ground moved. Ethan barely had time to react before the entire jungle trembled. A deep, guttural roar echoed from somewhere far beneath them. Ethan's stomach twisted. "Oh, come on. We killed the big bad already." Lyra was already on her feet, her eyes locked onto something in the distance. The horizon. Ethan followed her gaze. Then his heart stopped. The sky was splitting open. A massive crimson fissure carved itself through the atmosphere, stretching from horizon to horizon. The jungle beneath it shuddered violently, trees splitting at the roots. And then, from the depths of the planet itself, it rose. Ethan couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Because the thing rising from the shattered earth wasn't just a monster. It was the planet itself. A colossus of obsidian and shifting violet light, its form barely comprehensible, like something that had existed before time. It was alive, a being of pure, ancient will. And it was awakening. Lyra's breath hitched. The relic, it was never the true source of the curse. Ethan swallowed hard. Then what the hell is? Lyra turned to him. The planet. This world isn't just a death world, Ethan. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It's the prison of something far worse. Ethan's blood turned to ice. The ground split open, cracks spidering beneath their feet. A deep grinding sound filled the air, like stone shifting against stone, but impossibly loud. The Colossus moved. A single titanic limb, shaped like a twisted amalgamation of claw and ancient architecture, tore itself free from the earth, dragging mountains with it. And then, it turned. It was watching them. Ethan's body screamed run, but his legs wouldn't move. Lyra grabbed his arm. We need to get off this planet. Ethan forced himself to snap out of his paralysis. Great idea. You got a ship hidden somewhere. Lyra clenched her jaw. No, but I might know where we can find one. Ethan didn't like that answer, but he liked the titanic, planet-killing monstrosity staring at them even less. So he ran. They sprinted through the collapsing jungle, dodging falling debris as the planet itself shifted violently. Trees were ripped from the ground, stone towers from the ruins shattered like glass. Behind them, the Colossus let out a roar so deep it shook the air itself. Ethan risked a glance back. Bad idea. A wave of crimson energy blasted outward, carving through the jungle like a scythe. Ethan barely managed to duck behind a fallen structure before the shockwave ripped past, leaving nothing but charred, smoldering ground in its wake. Lyra yanked him forward. Keep moving. Ethan didn't argue. They ran for what felt like hours, navigating through the crumbling remains of the Deathworld. Every few minutes, the Colossus moved, and the entire planet groaned in agony. Then, finally, they saw it. A ship, or at least, what was left of one. It was massive, buried beneath centuries of jungle overgrowth, its hull cracked but still mostly intact. The design was alien, not human, but not quite like Lyra's people either. Ethan's heart pounded. Will it fly? Lyra didn't answer. She was already sprinting toward it. The ground quaked violently. The Colossus was closing in. Ethan scrambled up the ramp behind her, his lungs burning. Please tell me you know how to fly this thing. Lyra's hands flew over the ancient control panels, speaking in a language Ethan didn't understand. The ship's interior lights flickered weakly. The engines groaned. Then, they roared to life. Outside, the Colossus raised a hand. Energy gathered at its fingertips, a swirling storm of death preparing to wipe them from existence. Ethan's breath caught. Lyra. The ship lurched upward. The energy fired. And the world turned white. Epilogue. After the fall. Ethan gasped as he came to, his head pounding. He was still strapped into the co-pilot's seat of the ship. The controls flickered weakly, the interior shaking as the vessel drifted through space. Lyra sat in the pilot's seat, her gaze locked on the view screen. Ethan turned, and what he saw would haunt him forever. The Deathworld was gone. Or rather, it was no longer a planet. The Colossus had fully risen, its form barely visible through the swirling, cracked remnants of what had once been its prison. It was drifting now, awake for the first time in untold millennia. Ethan exhaled shakily. We didn't stop it. Lyra's fingers tightened over the controls. No, she murmured. Ethan swallowed. So what happens now? Lyra's violet eyes darkened. We run. And behind them, in the endless void of space, the Deathworld's true horror drifted free. Waiting, watching, searching, for a new world to claim.